So, the window of tolerance was coined by Dan Siegel. Dan's a neuroscientist at UCLA in California in the US. Many of you probably would know his work around the mind, also working with youth. And Siegel used both complexity theory and systems theory to come up with this model around the window of tolerance. So, we're going to be talking about this model in particular around the nervous system of the clients that we're working with. But this model could also be applied in a number of different ways. And we could apply it to, for example, a family system. We could also apply it to a healthcare system. There's many applications. Siegel has also applied it to the ecosphere and looking at kind of our larger environment. But we're going to focus here on individuals and their nervous systems. And this is a graphic that captures the window of tolerance as it relates to the nervous system under stress. And this graphic comes from the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine. This is a graphic that's actually free, available online. You can use it with clients. You can use it in your own work. Appreciate that they made it public. But the idea here, as you can see, is that we have a middle zone here represented in yellow that's known as the window of tolerance. And this is the technical term here is an optimal zone of physiological arousal. Yeah, this kind of sweet spot between too much and too little. So when we're in our windows or when a client's in their window, it's like our heart is beating, but it's not racing. Or we might feel energized, but we don't necessarily feel anxious or overly anxious. We can feel stress or pressure, but we can cope with it. Like quite literally, we can tolerate it. That's where this word comes from around the window of tolerance. We can be present with our experience. That doesn't mean that we're flat. Sometimes people hear about the window and they think, oh, that just means being calm. We can actually be quite distressed. We could be sad and happy. We could also be inside of our window. Now, on the two extremes of this are forms of what's known as dysregulation. And this is where we're really getting into the neurophysiology of stress and of trauma. But as you'll see that we have the red and the orange here, you could think of this as almost one different band together. But let's focus on the top here, and that is hyperarousal. So hyperarousal means that there's literally too much arousal in the nervous system. And this is where we're feeling, our clients feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and out of control. On the way to hyperarousal, we have this orange band here of dysregulation. And you can all, imagine or kind of track for yourselves. What does it feel like for you when you start to get stressed? You're moving towards extreme anxiety, and there's that band or that zone of dysregulation. You're starting to feel a little bit dysregulated, but you're not fully in this band of hyperarousal. You can see this volcano up top. One way this is talked about in terms of too much arousal is like the accelerator of the autonomic nervous system being slammed to the ground. Again, it's too much for us. Our pupils are wide. Our heart rate is racing. So that's hyperarousal. And then on the lower end here, you'll notice hypoarousal. And this is literally too little physiological arousal in the system. And this is where we're feeling, spacey, zoned out, or numb. And again, you can see that orange band of dysregulation. There are gradations that a person will go on that has them know whether they're in or out of their window. As a practice here, in a moment, we'll talk about, well, how does this all tie into our client work and work with resilience? But just to bring this as live as possible, see if you can notice for a moment, where are you in your window right now? See if you can notice either through the visual, but also turning inside, turning your attention to your inner world. Where would you place yourself on this graph? In this moment right now, do you sense that you are in your window, like kind of in the middle? Or are you more towards dysregulation on either side. Right? There's a lot of energy, there's not enough energy. And simply notice what told you that that's where your window of tolerance is right now, or where you are in your window. It's helpful for us as clinicians to notice what the signs and signals are, where we get those data points of information. And you can come back here to this graphic. I want to talk for a moment about why this would be useful for us as clinicians. Then we'll talk about how it connects to resilience. So the first part is that people who are experiencing high degrees of stress and even trauma will tend to experience something known as dysregulated arousal, meaning that they are out of their window of tolerance. This is another graph just acknowledging that our arousal is changing all the time. And then people who are traumatized or under high degrees of stress, they will end up going outside of their window of tolerance. Now, one of the things that you can look for are these different signs of dysregulated arousal. You don't necessarily have to train in trauma work for a year or 2 years to be able to start to identify the signs that people are under significant amounts of stress. Now, all of you will have, of course, your own competence of how you're recognizing this, but dysregulated arousal is a key competency that we can hold in terms of being able to recognize when people are out of their window and what interventions that we actually might want to use to support people to come back into their window. So, I work with a lot of meditation, yoga teachers, coaches, and therapists who are not necessarily professional trauma therapists, but they're interested in working with trauma. They say, well, how would I know if someone might be experiencing trauma, or how can I gauge someone's level of activation in a session? Arousal is key. Physiological arousal is a great way because you can learn to track for nonverbal cues that tells you that someone's out of their window. So let me show you a couple of lists here. But these are two different, I'm going to show you both two lists here. And these are signs and signals that you can look for that someone might be out of their window of tolerance. So first here we have some signs of hyperarousal. And you're welcome to pause. You can look through this. But common signs of hyperarousal would be agitation, some kind of hyperactivity in one's soma. Could be tingling, twitching, hyperventilation. An exaggerated startle response is key. Increased heart rate. There's all these different signs and signals that you can learn to track for. Again, not to necessarily diagnose trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, but to give you cues that someone might be outside of their window, which we'll talk about in a moment, is very important to ascertain when it comes to working with resilience. If you want to pause and look at it, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'm going to move here to hypoarousal. So here's the signs of hypoarousal. Again, not enough physiological arousal in the nervous system. So this could be something like a flaccid muscle tone. Someone is extremely still, frozen. They have that pale skin tone or a fixed gaze. I mean, many of you, I imagine, have either experienced this or you've been with someone where they have that 1,000-yard stare. It's like they're there, but they're not really there. There's some absence. Dissociation really fits into hypoarousal. So here's another list here of different signs that you can look for around hypoarousal.